All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's uh, episode of the Power Not podcast. I am Juan Boyce, and per usual, let's go ahead and get it started. My name is Juan Boyce. I have been programming computers since the age of 11. And so I've worked for some startups, some places you might have heard of. Um, but today, what we're talking about is leadership. And leadership, not unlike tying a bow tie, is dealing with ambiguity, dealing with surprises, and but ultimately, what you want to be able to do is have something come out straight, come out beautiful. Not unlike tying a bow tie. So let's go ahead and get the show started. Today's guest is someone who understands the hidden cost of high performance. Michael Greenspan spent years climbing the engineering ladder from software dev to manager, only to realize that achievement without alignment leads to burnout, self doubt, and a gnawing sense that something is missing. Now he's a coach for engineers who look like they're thriving on the outside, but are quietly stuck, tired, or lost on the inside. In this episode, we talk about what it really takes to grow beyond the code, how to gain influence without losing yourself, how to support a brain that doesn't fit the standard mold, and why being the favorite engineer doesn't mean being a suck up. If you've ever felt like your effort isn't transitioning in the growth, or you're chasing a version of success that doesn't quite feel like yours, this conversation is you. Welcome, Michael Greenspan from The Complete Engineer. Thank you for being on this show with me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I must say, watching you multitask, tying that power knot over there while giving that intro with a smile and everything, I'm totally. You set the bar pretty high.
Oh gosh, I'm not even gonna lie. I ran into some trouble there, but nonetheless, I just roll with it and whatnot, But hey, but speaking of ties, let's see today's tie. And
Oh, okay. We start off with this, huh?
yes, of course, that's the first thing we
Ah,
do.
okay. So the story behind this is that I don't own a bow tie, and this is the Power Knot podcast. So you need to buy a bow tie. And to be honest, I like blue and I like paisley. I was actually looking for a guitar themed bow tie, but couldn't really find one that was self tie. They were all not allowed. So
Mm.
I I I, uh, I opted for just something that's a bit cool. Blue's a good color. Paisley's cool gold.
Yeah,
And
it's definitely cool. Definitely cool. I today's Saturday for me. Usually, I'll try to match my shirt, but today I just said let's go with something a little different. This little polka dot uh, deal right here. This is I don't know. Just wanted something that was gonna contrast with the orange instead of trying to match it with the orange.
the
So I
first time I
decided.
tied a bow tie was about 20 minutes ago, and I'm already
Oh,
getting
you,
flustered
you,
already. Right? You go like this,
You're
and then you go
getting you're
like that.
getting ahead of us. We
Oh,
haven't we
whoa,
haven't
whoa,
started
whoa!
yet. We haven't started yet. No, we do it as the show goes along. So
Oh,
So
okay.
yes,
Like
yes.
I told you earlier, I have a surprise prop that I'm going to put on just to finish the look.
Oh yeah.
Once it's
Well,
all
don't
on,
spoil the
Stay
surprise.
tuned to the end if you want to see it, everyone.
Yes, yes, yes. So yeah. So that was the first question about the tie. So let's go ahead and start. So let's say you said that you were achieving, but it didn't feel meaningful. What did that look like, and how did you know that something needed to change?
Yeah, well, I after being an engineer for 7 years and then moving into management at medium-sized company, a few thousand people, and I stayed there for 2 years as just a plain manager, let's say, just engineering manager, no fancy titles other than that. I got a job as a director of engineering at a startup, and the interview process was totally non-existent. It was a mutual contact introduced me and the CEO and some other executive. We met for about like 25 minutes. Oh, you know how to code? Yeah. Oh, you're a manager? Yeah. Oh, you're a startup? Yeah. And you're hiring? Yeah. Okay, good. Let's just, how much money do you want? And name it. Okay, good. Let's start in 3 weeks. Like, okay, good. So I thought I was going to be building some sort of software that was going to be this like greenfield project, and sit in the corner, hire a few engineers, get it all going. And then when I walked in that first day after that wonderfully thorough interview process, I'm like, the person like that was sitting there, I'm like, okay, so hey, nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about this project. It was supposed to be like a social network. Tell me a little bit about this social network. And he's like, he starts laughing at me. He's like, there's no social network. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we're an ad tech company. That's just one of the executives' dreams. We don't know anything about that. I'm like, huh? And then like within the first few days, I started realizing like, okay, this job has nothing to do with no social network. I'm not building anything like that. And this is all ad tech, which is PHP and JavaScript and revenue and tons of scale. I'm like, I come from enterprise background, enterprise software. And I'm totally like, okay, this is gonna be very interesting. Needless to say, I didn't necessarily have a lot of support in terms of like, okay, here's the roadmap, and here's your growth chart, your growth path, and here's how you're gonna thrive in this environment. Everything kind of had to be made up as I went along, and there were many times in my first 2 months where I said something that seemed to have gone the wrong way, and it's like I remember at one point one of the executives saying something like, "Hey, Michael, if you do this again, the CEO is not going to really tolerate this." Like I didn't really do anything wrong. It was just total misalignment of expectations. And so I spent about 2 years there navigating this very intense, ambiguous situation. And I learned a ton about leadership. But what I also learned was what I thought was so cool. I remember I was so excited. I'm a director of technology. I thought I was just getting a management job. All of a sudden on the contract, it says director of engineering, or not even a director of technology. I was, I was like over the moon, as they say, which I don't think I've ever said before. So thank you for bringing that out of me. But it was hard, and I thought that the title was amazing, and I was with all these investors for the first time that were coming into the office, and I had a lot of autonomy to a degree until I messed up, and then needed to figure out how to do damage control. But through that experience, I started realizing that this title doesn't actually mean anything. This responsibility is actually stressing me out more than it is giving me joy. And the fact that I wasn't necessarily doing as well as I hoped I would be doing in the position for a lot of that experience left me feeling like garbage. I felt like I'm a failure. I felt like I don't know what I'm doing. These executives keep being disappointed with the work I'm doing, but I'm doing everything that I know is right. I'm doing everything that has worked for me in the past, but I can't just blame them, can I? And it was just crushing to see a lot of the setbacks that I was going through. And so I knew something needed to change. But like I also felt like I don't know how to get out of this place because my experience is so unique. I would go to interviews and be like, try to tell them, no, but everything's crazy. Everything is so disorganized, but I don't want to come off as complaining. People are like, okay, it sounds like you're going through a lot, but yeah, you've never managed managers and your team is small. And you've never worked, you have not a lot of experience just as like a regular manager that I can just, pigeonhole into a regular company. So I felt like stuck, and I felt like I was not a good manager. So that's how I knew that something needed to change, because the path I was on was just not sustainable and was not working for my life.
Yeah, that sounds like there's a lot going on. You got like ambiguity there, but I don't know. It's almost like based on that interview process, y- y- you it's not surprising that they didn't have a lot of structure in place, I would say, you know.
Yeah, easy
But
to see in hindsight. I was blinded by the title and by the ticket out of my current job because I was just kind of done there. It wasn't toxic or anything, but I felt stuck, and I was terrified of interviewing too. I did not want to go through regular interview processes to get a new job. Like the fact that it was quick and fancy title I was like, great, this is gonna be amazing.
yeah, the funny thing is that I don't know. I would imagine that just having the fancy title would attract more other similar jobs with similar fancy titles, but then again the other interviews were perhaps a little bit more structured, so like you said, once they figured you hadn't managed other managers, it probably didn't go terribly far. But but let me ask this though. Uh, how did you ultimately transition out of that? Like what was the plan there?
Yeah, well, to be honest, this is what got me into coaching, not as a coach, but as a coachee. I
Mhm.
I knew someone who was very into self development. It was actually the CEO of the company I worked at previously that I had taken on, or had him take me on a little bit as a mentor. And I asked him who he can refer, and he referred me to a coach. And I work with them, and they really helped me reframe the entire experience in a way that put my values front and center in my perspective. So that instead of looking at how I was doing through the lens of what my executives were expecting, which was never really clear and never really realistic and never really consistent, I started looking through my performance, let's say, through the lens of what was important to me and what I knew was important for a team to have, and what I knew was important for a team, or for a product to launch successfully. And a lot of that had to do more with personal values and behaviors than it did with tangible results. But even in terms of the results, I was able to start seeing, like, hey, there's a moving target over here. And it's impossible for me to keep up with that. And why do I care so much about what they think when my values are totally misaligned with the way that they evaluate things, right? If I value teamwork and they value just grunt work, then of course there's going to be a misalignment in what our assessment of how I'm doing. And so going through that process really helped me just stop caring and building more confidence in the way that I saw things and the way that I thought that things should be going.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I'm a person that is intrinsically motivated, I don't know. I feel like there's a big culture. Well, how can I say this? With remote work having become a thing recently, fairly recently, a few years ago, I should say. Um, you can't necessarily force people to do things, and it's very important to have a certain amount of alignment as far as what people's individual goals are and what the team's goals are. So I get that. Finding that alignment is extremely important. Um, but speaking of that, you work with a lot of engineers with ADHD. What kind of systems actually help them get unstuck, and why do the usual ones fail?
Yeah. Well, I started my ADHD learning journey a few years ago. I was managing an engineer who had ADHD, was very open about it, and helped open my eyes to the unique struggles that people with ADHD have. And I started realizing that I actually am, it seems like my management style is very conducive to supporting people like that.
Hmm.
And I've been taking an ADHD course as well to learn more about what it is and what kind of support people with ADHD need. And that's been feeding into, of course, my coaching practice and helping me build out this ADHD software engineering community task together for the past 2 months or so. And the traditional systems, if you look at, the productivity hacks that are put out there that are supposed to do magic for everyone, they are built for people and probably by people who have average executive functioning capabilities, right? Functioning is the mind tools that we have that enable us to solve problems, in particular, or also very much so over time. And that's what executive functioning is. And people with ADHD, the ADHD is actually defined as an impairment in executive functioning. And a lot of these productivity tools assume that there is a baseline level of executive functioning already in the person who's going to be using the productivity hacks. And once you start getting on the other side of the bell curve in terms of how people's executive functioning is, then of course the tools that are built for people in the middle of the bell curve are no longer going to work for them anymore. But it's really that no tools start working for them that are just cookie cutter, because their executive functioning is going to be very, very unique to their brain. The tools that they need are going to need to be custom made and personalized based on observing how you are already doing things, figuring out what's working, and then figuring out what parts of those systems are not working and then tweaking them.
Yeah. Hey, what's an example of one of these tools that are made for I guess a neurotypical person, and how specifically does that fail someone who has ADHD?
Yeah, well, let's talk about setting up time blocks.
Ah, the tomato timer.
Sure, yeah, there's different ways to do it. You put a little time block in your calendar, you put up reminders. Oh, it's magic, right? So I know that works for a lot of people, neurotypical people. Doesn't work for everyone, but it certainly works for quite a few people. Now, someone with ADHD, what happens typically, or for many of them, again, everyone's experience of ADHD is also going to be very different. So it could be that this actually works for people with ADHD for some people, but for many of them, what's going to happen is they're going to set that time block, and then the reminder is going to come, but they're so involved in the task that they were working on before that they're going to ignore the time block. They're going to ignore the reminder. And the source of that is because the issue is not necessarily the time management. There could be different core root factors that is leading this person to avoid it. Maybe the work that they schedule in there actually is just too multifaceted and ambiguous, which requires a lot of executive functioning to get started on. And so that's why they've been putting it off. So just because you scheduled it, it doesn't make that work any less multifaceted or ambiguous, right? So you're still going to want to avoid it. The ADHD mind, as I've been learning, is wired to run away as much as possible from thinking through deep things because it hurts, because of the impairment in executive functioning. So when executive functioning is impaired, and that also means that someone's one of the ways that can show up is working memory, which is the ability to sequence ideas in your mind in order to solve problems. That is also impaired, right? That is one of the reasons why the executive function becomes impaired. And that means that working on very, very deep problems can be hard to get started on, because you have to figure out how to load all that memory up and boot it all up, all that data into your brain, and it can hurt. So there's an impulse to run away from that type of work. And I'm not saying that people with ADHD cannot solve those problems. Many people, you can be extremely intelligent and have ADHD, but the people with ADHD who typically thrive are going to be people who realized or intuited that the issue is that these problems are too hard to solve in my mind or too hard to solve on my own. So I'm going to now leverage, outsourcing my memory, like creating sticky notes or doing brain dumps or talking things out. This is why body doubling works so well for people with ADHD. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It's just the concept of, or pair programming, just working with other people, let's say, because body doubling doesn't necessarily mean working with the other person directly, but a lot of people with ADHD are verbal processors, and that's why. At least this is what I've been learning and what I've been observing. So I don't know if anyone is watching this they can put in the comments if any of this resonates with you, or if you think that I'm full of nonsense.
Well, I'll say this: it resonates with me because I'm a believer that so-called handicaps are only handicaps in so much that our society fails to accommodate the wide differences that we have within people. Does that make sense? And
100%.
I've definitely used a post-it notes, made lists, write things on a whiteboard, and I've offloaded tasks to kind of break it down into smaller manageable chunks and whatnot. And I get that. Sometimes time blocking isn't necessarily something that works for me, because definitely if I'm in the middle of something and that has my focus, the time block doesn't really help me. I'm more of a person that believes in the maker schedule, if you're familiar with that, where once I'm in my deep focus, I really don't want to break that up. But speaking of breaking things up, let's go ahead and break this up and start tying this tie.
He's a master of segues over here,
huh? Something like that. So I've already got the tie. So let's go ahead and cross it over, and then what I like to do is I take this end, I cross it over, and then I just pull it under, and then I just take that long end and just get it out the way, and we'll go from there. And then Yeah, let's go with another question here. So, what are some signs of burnout or misalignment that engineers tend to overlook until it's already affecting their work or confidence?
Yeah, well, one major sign is just like being apathetic, like just not caring anymore, right? When there's no passion left, when there's just like when things are going wrong or your work isn't necessarily as good as it used to be, and it doesn't bother you, it's just whatever. Lack of energy and drive in work. That's a huge sign of burnout. Another thing which is related is also just being frustrated with even small things that are probably worth getting frustrated at, but maybe back a few months ago or last year or the beginning of your stint in this role didn't bother you as much. You were able to look beyond them and just focus on the positive attributes of the company or focus on your work and not let that stuff get to you. But getting frustrated with little things, or again, the things that didn't frustrate you before because you were able to overcome them, that's a huge sign of burnout, just losing patience with things that are happening at work. And then there's also work that used to excite you that's just like feels tedious and doesn't excite you anymore. It's a little bit different than the apathy, because here it's like you're getting bored with stuff that should excite you. Like there's problems that you were solving that we were all into, and it's not only that you don't care about them anymore, it's like you don't even enjoy it anymore. Even when you push yourself to do it, it's just something that is lacking any type of pleasure anymore, any type of sense of accomplishment. These are some big signs that someone's burning out.
I never thought about it like that, but yeah, I definitely know the feeling of normally. I'm very excited to go to work on Mondays and and get back to solving problems and whatnot, but definitely feeling apathetic about that or not excited about diving into things. That is definitely something I have not previously identified as burnout, and and I get that. It's I don't know how does one deal with that? How do you um once you've identified that, what do you do from there?
Well, the first thing that someone needs to do is identify that it's happening, right? And that can take courage. And then you have to decide that you want to do something about it as well, which also takes courage. It's kind of easy sometimes to just live in that space and use it as an excuse, whether you might not even realize you're doing that, but it can just be easy like to just externalize it and blame other people for your burnout. And it could very well be that the catalyst for the burnout is due to the environment. 100%, that's quite possible. But even if that's the case, it's still your problem, unfortunately, right? It's still something that is going to be on you ultimately to deal with, or on you to live with, right? So it's really that decision and awareness is step one. That I want to change this because no one else can change it for you. And then the next thing is to identify what do you actually want to be doing? What actually excites you? How do you want to show up at work? How do you want to show up at life? Identifying this like prototype or this ideal image, a north star, so to speak, of who you want to be is a huge part of it, because then you can start figuring out what leads to that type of um, you showing up, that version of you. What is going to fuel that? And then you can start fueling yourself, right? Then you can start saying, okay, I want to be someone who's humble or uplifting or insightful. These are things that I want to be. These are ways I want to show up. So am I able to show up like that at work right now? Maybe I'm tired of everything that's going on with my tasks, but if I start actually paying attention to my ability and my capacity to show up in these ways, then I maybe can, as they say, I know this is like a popular kids book these days, you start filling your bucket up. You can start realizing, hey, like this is actually the stuff that energizes me. I thought that my work was energizing me, but it turns out it wasn't. Actually showing up in the version that I want to show up as is what energizes me. And you start tracking that. It could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could just be intuitively. But once you have those ideas in your mind and you're showing up deliberately looking for opportunities to live up to that, you can start living again.
Yeah, that it sounds a lot like, having that alignment. Like once you wrote, you don't need to code more, you need a clearer path, right? So what are engineers missing when they feel stuck at the same level?
Well, an engineer can feel stuck and not necessarily feel burned out, right? I mean, sometimes it's a sense of burnout and that apathy and just not realizing that you're living in your own misery, unfortunately, which is very difficult to get out of, and it's extremely hard.
Hmm.
Another thing could just be like they're just literally stuck, like they don't know what to do. The manager is not necessarily pulling them up. Maybe they don't even have to be a toxic manager, but the manager is just not there to proactively uplift these people and get them to
Hmm.
the next level. And then going back to this idea of ambiguous and multifaceted stuff, it's very hard to know what to do when you're just an engineer sitting on your team just dealing with a daily grind. And it's scary to go apply for jobs. I'm too busy to do side projects. Do I even need to do side projects? Where do I even start? Is it because I don't know what I'm doing? Maybe that's why I'm not getting promoted, or maybe that's why I'm not applying for jobs. Like, there's just so many emotions that can just keep someone from doing anything.
Yeah, I get that. But, promotions do hinge on non-technical skills like influence and visibility. So, which of these is hardest to coach, and how do you help people grow it?
I think the idea of influence is something that a lot of engineers don't intuit. Visibility, some people, is also a struggle, but the idea of being influential can sometimes not be something that happens automatically, right? And people think that they need to work on. Um, you looking for opportunities out. Well, the truth is, influence and visibility really need to go together. And I actually wrote a post about that that's going out tomorrow. I'm pretty sure. Um,
I know how that goes. I think
yeah,
about a lot of posts that have yet to go out, but I don't know. I'll have to make sure to read it tomorrow.
yeah. A lot of engineers do amazing work within their team and just expect other people to notice it and to appreciate it. Now, that's a mistake. First of all, your work does not speak for itself. Um, People outside of your team are not necessarily going to know the work you did. Even people in your team aren't going to know the work that you did. Not only that, you might think it was super highly impactful, but how are you showing the influence that you've made and the impact that you've made through that work? You might say, "Oh, well, I wrote it in a ticket or something like that." Okay, but if the ticket just says refactor monster class and it just goes through, to do and progress done, and the only people who saw it are your teammates and maybe some product manager saw it, like, okay, why does the product manager even care about that work? You need to understand that your work has to be visible, but the right part of your work has to be visible. It's not the work itself that needs to be visible. It is the pain point that you are solving either for yourself or for the team or for your future self or future team or for the product or for the customer. That needs to be front and center. And that goes in with visibility. And the more you can do that, the more you show that you're able to understand that your job is to solve pain points, not just to write code, and you make that visible, the more influence then you will get.
Yes, okay. And here's the thing: your post about becoming your manager's favorite engineer, that was great. But let for those of us who are viewing who haven't seen it, can you know just briefly summarize and ask, and then tell me why do you think it hit such a nerve?
Yeah, I don't remember all the specifics. I think there was like 7 things I listed, but essentially most of it hinged on looking at your manager as a human being who has their own emotional reality, their own stressors, and their own expectations. And realizing that the more you can get on their side to help them and be a partner for them, the more opportunities are going to come your way. The more influence really you're going to have on them. Because if a manager knows that they can trust you to, like, just like a good leader needs to empathize with their engineers, it's also, it works the other way that if an engineer can empathize with a manager, then that relationship is going to be stronger.
Yeah, I get it. I'm a big believer that empathy really works in all directions. In so much as like we're all people and we're talking to people and working with people. I think that empathy and all that can go a long way. But before we go a little further, let's go ahead and make some progress on this tie. So what I
Uh,
do is the short end. I just take my finger right here at the wide part, and that's perfect. That makes the front loop. Now take this part off your shoulder and pull it down, and then it'll look sort of like an elephant. So that's perfect. So right now, let's just go ahead and hold it for this and answer another question.
all right.
What do most
That's our
engineers
last night.
misunderstand about their manager's role, and how can that shift in understanding change their career?
Yeah, well, I'll speak from my own experience here. I can't speak for everyone, but this is something that I experienced firsthand. I remember when I was an engineer, before I was a manager, there was that person on the team who was, from my perspective, totally underperforming, and it didn't make any sense that this person was still sticking around, right? Like, how is it that we haven't gotten rid of them yet? Or I thought that I'll use that the CEO could just come in and say, hey, your project is important. It doesn't matter what the other departments say. So we need to give you more budget and give you more resources. Like this idea that a manager has total control and influence over everything that happens. Like I never understood why my manager didn't get rid of this person, or why the project wasn't as important as it was when clearly my manager and even the executives said that it was. And then I became a manager, and I'm like, oh, okay. You mean we've already tried to terminate this person, but there's some like HR hurdles to doing that, and it's not so simple. Or, oh, okay. I see that this person is really not good at X, Y, and Z, but they're critical for A, B, and C. And I never really knew that. Oh, or maybe you're working behind the scenes with that person and trying to improve them, because at the end of the day, these are people's livelihoods, and it's not so simple or easy or desirable to just get rid of them, because maybe you can't backfill them either, right? There's just all these hidden factors. So I remember just thinking that there was so much control and just bad decisions. And then I become a manager, and I'm like, oh, okay, these decisions are actually not so simple. And just because I say something, it also doesn't mean that it's going to happen. Even when I do have buy-in from everyone around me, it still is not so simple to get things done if there are some obstacles in the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Geez, I'm trying to remember. I want to say this is like a Joel Spolsky thing, but
Right?
you said that the manager's job is to make sure that the engineers are under the impression that all they have to do is engineer. So, taking that the non-engineering stuff off their plate, as worrying about their team's performance or the business things and whatnot, and it really is an illusion, because as an engineer, ideally I just want to solve the problems that are assigned to me and do very good work. But in real life, yes, the managers are dealing with budgets and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with engineering. So I get that, that's important. So, and let's just do one more question before we get rid of this awkward position, because I don't know, enjoying it. You coach people through the messy middle when they're doing everything right and still hearing no. What's the mind shift they need most?
Yeah, there's a term that I'm going to use, which is like, stuck thinking, or letting go, or maybe even idealism. Thinking that, well, I'm doing everything I need to be doing, and they're not doing the things that I need. So it's the same thing I was talking about before, about proactively managing your manager, right? Or proactively making sure that your work is visible and communicated well. It, it's or when there's things going wrong in the company, and you're just frustrated with them. You can say, well, that's not my problem, and that's what's holding me back. No, stop being stuck thinking on principle, getting frustrated by things that are not necessarily relevant just because they should be a certain way, and focus on the things that you can actually change and make those changes, even if you think you shouldn't be doing those changes, because you're now figuring out how to increase your scope of influence that way. And that is ultimately what more senior people are expected to do, not just code, not just live in an environment where things are running the way that you think they should be running. No, you're working in an environment that is reality, which means there's ambiguity, which means that there's things that are inefficient, and your job is to cut through the noise. Don't get bothered by those problems that don't actually get in your way, or at least mitigate for them as much as possible without getting frustrated by it, and then focus on solving the problems that you can in order to pave a way forward for yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. By focusing on the things that you can do, that is a good way, I believe, of directing your energy. Right. I, for one, I hate to say I don't believe in excuses because mentioning excuses feels like an excuse within itself. But but what I like to do is by focusing on things I can do and not worrying about things I can't do, then I can eventually doing the things I can do will lead to me being able to do more.
Yeah, there's a
So,
difference between a reason and an excuse, right? So the
mhm,
reason is okay, like, yeah, I have a bad manager who's not supporting me. Good, that's a reason that I maybe haven't been promoted in 6 months, or that I'm not getting the opportunities I need. But once you make it an excuse, that means, and therefore I'm not going to do anything about it. No,
hmm,
don't make it an excuse. That might be the reason why it's been happening thus far. But once you acknowledge that that's the reason, let's see, can you do something about it now? Can you work around that? Can you get out of that situation? Maybe you need to get a new job if it's that bad and you really can't find a workaround and you really want to get a promotion or you really want to work on different projects. Don't make that an excuse to not take proactive grasp and control of your path.
okay, that makes sense. I guess the difference is, I guess it becomes an excuse when you use that as when it affects what you decide to do yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and now this is the third part, and not
That's
to
the
make
hard
any
part. Yeah.
excuses, but the reason is this is probably the hardest. I grab the elephant ears and I pull it forward away from my face, and I pull the trunk down towards the ground, and I'm looking for the hole. There should be a hole right here. And now once I grab the hole, I stick my finger through that hole, and then I just pinch the base of that trunk with my thumb, and then I just try to push it through that hole to make the loop. That should form the back loop.
Where
Once you get that back, oh, I hope I didn't lose you. But
something
the
feels different than when I did it last time, so I don't know.
uh, but what you want to do is you want to pull the base of that trunk and make sure you keep the tip of the trunk still in your hand. And if it you do it correctly, you should come up with something that looks like a bow tie.
I'm just missing the hole in the back for some reason. Some technical difficulties here.
Oh
Like I
no,
had it
no.
last time, so I'm confused.
Oh, no worries. It's definitely worth trying.
Is it
I'll do
easier?
it one more time. So what you should have is you'd have a front loop, right? And a
Yeah.
back loop. The front loop is the one that you made first, right? And then there's the double side and there's a single side. The back loop is the one that you're trying to create. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the single side of the back loop. When I pull it down, you see I'm back to having the elephants again, right? Remember that step? There we go. So then you pull the front loop forward and you pull down on the
Yes.
trunk, and
All
then
right.
you should be able to find a hole.
Okay, I think I found the hole.
And once you find the hole, I'll just use my thumb and forefinger to kind of pinch it. So I have that loop in my hand right there. Are you able to see? And then all I do is shove that piece of fabric through that hole. And I'm being very literal, but make sure you just want to pull it just enough to get a loop. That way, you'll form that back loop and you tighten it up by pulling on it, and then boom, a bow tie.
Boom, a bow tie. Okay,
Yeah.
now
Wait, did you do it? That's perfect.
you know, figure out where the little thing in the back is. Turn it up a little bit.
Uh,
All right, it's good enough for me.
oh, I think I tied the my headphone cable in my bow tie, but no worries there. I'll
Sounds
leave it
great.
there, and I'll figure out later. But that's perfect.
Gotta hide the little thing in the back.
Uh,
Details, details.
so just like I was able to.
Hey,
Well,
look at that. What do you know?
yes, that's a good one. You know what? Once you said you're not failing, you're adapting. That feels like a core belief in your work. Where did that insight come from?
I thought you were talking about with the bow tie. I was like,
Oh no!
felt like
I would say this. I would say this. I feel like failing and adapting, they feel similar. Because I would say that when you're learning, you're doing something that you don't already know, otherwise you wouldn't be learning. But um it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable to not know something already, especially as an adult, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So it's just that it's the understanding that before you're going to be great at something, you first got to be good at something. Before you're going to be good at something, first you got to be bad at something. First, you got to suck at it, right? I mean, maybe there's some little bit of natural talent that some people have, but at the end of the day, to get mastery, you're going to be bad at things. That is the first step to mastery, is to just not be good at the thing you are trying to master. So everyone is going to have their own unique path to mastery, and everyone is going to have their own definition of what mastery is as well. And instead of framing your attempts at mastery or at adequacy as failing, how does that serve you, right? Frame it as, I'm adapting, I'm learning, I'm going with the flow, I'm figuring it out as I go along to the best of my ability. It's just a mindset shift. I don't think there's really much magic to it. It's reminding yourself that, developing a support system of other people around you who can remind you of that and who are also living according to those values, and trying to block out influences in your life that are telling you the opposite. No, you are a failure. No, you are failing. And you can also be, let's say, failing and not necessarily be a failure. That's also something that's very important. Just because you're not achieving a result doesn't mean you are a failure. We cannot define ourselves by the results that we're aiming for in life. The best we can do is put in effort, right? And if you know that you put in an honest effort, given the constraints in your life, then what is the point in lamenting the lack of results that you're getting? It's just, how's that serving you also?
Yeah, I get it. Like I often like go to sports, and not to be too specific about sports, but when you play sports, you don't necessarily win every game. You don't necessarily make every score attempt. But you put in the effort to play very hard. You put in the effort to make those score attempts. And just because that score attempt doesn't necessarily lead to getting points, doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile to try. You know?
Yeah, and I think that specific quote about you're not failing, you're adapting was also um, a post about the market reality in software engineering in 2025, right? About how the job search these days, or maybe it was about, either way it will apply, about just the senior engineering, um, how that has changed, or being a manager. These three different things, like being a manager, has totally changed in 2025 than it has in 2024 in many ways, especially the application process, the job search process. Being a senior engineer also is a lot harder than it used to be. And both of these are the root cause. One of the causes is because teams are smaller than they used to be, budgets are lower than they used to be. And with AI, there's a higher expectation that you're just going to produce more than you used to as well. So you have less resources and higher expectations. So adapting to that, right? You're not failing if something changed without you even, like, in the blink of an eye, and now you don't know how to deal with it. How can you possibly consider yourself as failing? Like, that's not fair. That doesn't make any sense. Look at it as an adaptation. And when we're adapting, sometimes we need to actually, like, break our systems completely, right? For growth to come, sometimes the way we were doing things before are going to completely not give us the results that they were giving us before. And we have to destroy that system and create a new one. So during that messy process, you're not failing. You're adapting, right?
Of course, yes. And I've been a web developer for many years, and the web has changed dramatically, and even now it's still changing. So that adaptation is definitely something that is par for the course. And I just want to remind everyone that's watching. This is live, so you put your comments on there. Any questions you want answered, I'm able to see them, and so we'll address them if we have time. So let's go ahead and ask another question. What is one belief you held early in your engineering career that you no longer believe?
That I needed to keep climbing the ladder to be successful.
Hmm.
And that was one of the reasons why I was so excited by that director title. And for my first year, probably at that company, I really wanted to be a CTO. Like I had this dream that one day I'm going to be a CTO because then you've got it, right? You've made it at the top of the ladder. Is beautiful, is amazing. This is a pinnacle of success. But the more I started learning about what's involved in that type of work, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance about I wasn't actually interested in a lot of the responsibilities of executives or of very senior leadership, but I kept trying to do it or wanting to do it or judging myself for not doing it. And eventually I came to realize that actually I'm not interested in all that stuff. I don't want to do side projects on Sundays and learn frameworks on Wednesday nights. I have 5 kids and I need to take care of them and I want to be with them. I don't want to work all the time. That means that maybe I won't get the fanciest title. I won't make the most money. I won't work at the most prestigious companies, but that's okay because I'm actually living the life that I want to live. So, kind of coupling my sense of external success with my ego, just to be blunt, and with my feeling of accomplishment was something that I had to crush. And there's been no looking back. I mean, that was like 5 years ago or something. That's no longer a part of me at all. I remember a friend I have, we were hanging out by a lake talking about this stuff. And then he's like, okay, here. I was like at a very rough time. He's like, take this rock. This is all of the issues that you're having with, your current situation. You're going to throw it into the lake and let go. You're going to throw that burden away. And to this day, I still remember that. I mean, it sounds so cheesy. At the time, I thought this is ridiculous, but that physical motion tied to the sensory experience, I think, along with the intention behind it, has really stuck with me.
No, I get it. I think a lot of times, just having I don't know, an actual ritual is a thing, right? You might as a kid have a grown up ritual, whatever that ritual might be, but um and it's like, what's the difference between that day and the day before? You had a party, but but the ritual, it's meaningful, if that makes any sense, so it feels different, than it was before.
Yeah, I think it anchors your body and your soul or your mind, whatever you want to call it, your consciousness. They're working in tandem now. You're not only emotionally, internally throwing something away from me, right? There's a physical act, and it just makes it not only in the spooky realm of mind and consciousness that I threw it away, but I actually threw it away in this world as well.
Exactly. That's exactly. Okay. Well, that's good. Let me ask more about the complete engineer and coaching. Well, you did mention that you saw coaching, right? But what made you want to become a coach and coach other people?
Yeah, well, when I experienced the power of being coached, it lit a spark in me like, hey, I got to do this stuff with people that I'm working with, my reports, right? Because I can see a lot of people are very empty or confused or drained or burned out, right? Insert whatever states of being that are not great places to be. And I wanted to use the secret sauce that was used on me, right? Here, have some of this. And I was doing it for years, just taking some of the templates, kind of adapting them, some of the ideas that I went through with my coach, and mostly just do it yourself coaching. And at some point, I decided this is something that I'm very passionate about. As I said, I do have 5 kids, and I have a large family, and I'm part of a very rich community. Not like a very a large community rather. Rich sounds like we're all
No, the English language can be wishy-washy. I
yeah,
understand what you mean.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
part of a community that is close-knit and has a lot
yes.
of emotion and whatnot.
And I
Yes,
mentor a lot of people who are newly married who also want to create large families or build large families or at the beginning of their careers. There's a lot of mentorship that my wife and I do for people informally. And I just got to a point where I'm like, you know what? I want to actually learn how to do this from people who have studied this. Um, to be honest, for many years, I had this belief, this limiting belief that, well, I should be able to figure it out on my own, right? Because a lot of people, I'd be like, well, I want to become a coach. How did you become a coach? Well, you don't really need to get trained to become a coach. Anyway, you can just call yourself a coach and start coaching people. And like, idealizing this idea of do it yourself and figure it out. And you don't need to go to like a structured program. And finally, I got to this point of acceptance for the past few years. It's like, no, I actually thrive learning in a curriculum with other people. Just because other people are able to figure things out on their own and they love that type of rapid iteration, I like starting with a curriculum or with some idea of a starting point and then iterating on that. That is the best way for me to do things. And we'll just go spend $30 on Udemy. Well, that's not working for me either. How many courses do we all have on Udemy just sitting there that are 25 minutes in, but it was only $25, so it was going to solve all your problems, but you never make the time to actually study it. Anyway, I digress. Point being that finally last year, I decided to invest my own money in a coaching certification. And I had no intention of actually going into full-time coaching just yet. I figure this will be a little side gig, and at the very least, this will enhance my skills as an engineering manager, right? I'm going to now be able to coach people, career coach them through uh, blockers and mindsets that are holding them back in a much more effective way as their manager. Enrolled in the class for November of 2024. And then in October, I got laid off. For the first time, finally, it was bound to happen to me, right?
right.
Um, I hope not, but yeah. If anyone's listening, it's not bound to happen to you. That's just how it felt in the moment. And I spent about 2 months applying for jobs and was fortunate enough to actually get a bunch of interviews, which was really cool because I know a lot of people have struggles with that. But through the interview processes that I was going through, I started realizing, okay, the engineering management market is very different than it was before. The jobs are more technical, the expectation. They're more demanding than they were. Not only for that, but it just seems like you just get this sense that people want more grinding. And the barrier to entry in the interview process is more rounds than I remember, more technical expectations, and much more competition. So just much harder to actually land roles. And if it wasn't bad enough, the salaries that I'm seeing are also lower than what I was making, right? So you have a harder job with a strong barrier to entry that's going to take me probably 6 months of upskilling just to get through an interview process. And what's the prize at the end of it? Less money than what I was already making. So I thought, you know what? I'm starting this class like next week, or I started it a week ago, whatever it was. Why don't I like double down on coaching and see what I can do with that? This is a passion of mine. All right. And now's the time, right? I've been a professional for 16 years. I've learned a ton. How can I leverage my knowledge of what I know about engineering, my knowledge of what I know about humans, and figure out what pain points I can now solve in the world to make a livelihood that's actually going to fuel me and make the world a better place without all the stuff that I don't like about working in a big company or a regular company. Not that I'm saying it's terrible, but since there was such a long process ahead of me anyway, why not spend that investing in myself to bring more goodness into the world and paving a path of more prosperity and fulfillment in my own life as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of coaching. I feel like, you know, I don't know, maybe it's an American thing, but we're very, very individualistic, and 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 that's not necessarily how things should be. The fact is that even if you can, learn something on your own, you, you know, part of knowing yourself is knowing what you're good at and what your strengths are, And there's a saying, you want to get somewhere fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, go together, and I think that there's so much more that you can achieve when you're able to work with somebody and work with other people. And I think that coaching helps with so much stuff, because getting that alignment and prioritizing not just your job but prioritizing yourself, I think, is extremely important, right?
We have a crisis of anxiety and low self-esteem in North America right now.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is because people are constantly trying to live up to standards that they never thought about and that
Hmm.
not actually fulfill them, and that they're not suited to live up to either. So coaching is all about taking your beliefs and making you hyper aware of them, crystallizing them, understanding what they are, and helping them be the guiding principles of your life. And until someone does that, they're not going to necessarily, they're probably not going to be happy. They might be super successful. And I'm not saying that you have to be coached in order to do that either. Some people can intuit that depending on their background, depending on their nature, depending on their circumstances. Some people are able to have a fulfilled life without needing to go to a coach to do that with them. Although I would imagine that they probably had some sort of coaching type experiences, either with friends or mentors or parents or teachers, et cetera, et cetera. But for those of us who weren't as fortunate, or just it wasn't enough when we were growing up, a coach can really create magical moments of self-awareness and fulfillment through just bringing out what you already know is true and making it more real.
Yes, of course. And then I would say, as far as being happy, I think that people have a way of redefining success in order to either make themselves happy or make themselves miserable. Like, for example, you can have money, but it's money's just a number, right? So whatever number you have, you can always say, well, you know there's a number bigger that I don't have. Even when you have enough money to buy all of the things you want, you can always, I don't know, but I get it. Maybe having a coach, like I said, you can prioritize the things that matter. Like spending time with family and having enough to take care of that, and just having a really a life that's full of abundance. And I think that's a good thing, right?
For some people, it's literally just taking an hour out of their week to reflect on these things with someone else. Just having that space, that sacred space to be able to reflect and cut out the noise. That itself can be valuable because we're so used to these things pinging us at every waking moment, right? And then what are we seeing? Other people's success. We're
Yes.
seeing all the projections of success that other people are putting, and we forget, or it's just we don't believe that those are just projections. We think that that's actually what's happening, when the vast majority of images that we see on social media are perfectly curated to project a success that is maybe a little bit overinflated, right? Maybe.
Yeah, and before we run out of time, I forgot to ask about the prop. You said you were going to get the prop
Well, I think
once
that it
you.
actually perfectly relates to what we were just talking about. So I'm Sabbath observant,
Of
and
course.
I'll wear that this week to the synagogue or whatever. I got my plan. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to reproduce this knot, but I got the video, so we're good. And one of the things that I think has kept me just going and fulfilled and close to my family and living a more spiritually or just meaningful life is this Sabbath, where like we cut off our phones for 25 hours. No technology is allowed, no driving. We're allowed to eat hot food that's reheated. I'm not saying we live like totally like in a shack or anything like that, but active use of technology is not allowed, which is a topic for another discussion probably. But it forces you to just reflect on what's important. And one of the things that I do on the Sabbath is dress up in super fancy clothes by our standards, so that you can just feel, doesn't matter what's going on during the week. On the Sabbath, you're royalty, right? That's the idea.
Mhm.
you eat a feast fit for queens and kings, and you dress up like you're part of the royal family. So I know it's like, I figure, here's my formal attire over here that I'm gonna show. So on the Sabbath, I wear my crown, and I figure we're getting all formal with the tie. Why not bring the hat out for whoever's watching this over here? My fedora.
Yes, yes, and what Sabbath begins at what sundown tomorrow or whatnot.
Today's Thursday, so yeah, sundown tomorrow until sundown Saturday.
Yes,
No
so yes,
phones, no work, just bliss. Honestly, good food, amazing company, and it's really a secret to making sure you have that space, like I was talking about, to not only reflect but to actually live. Sensory, like I was saying before, also bringing the soul and body together.
yes, of course, of course. I think that it's definitely important to reflect and to keep things in perspective. And thank you for being here and being on the show. I think that's our time here. Is there any parting thought before we end the stream here?
Thanks so much. And if anyone wants to check me out, you can add me on LinkedIn. You can go to thecompleteengineer.com, or for more of the ADHD related stuff, there's a community that I've been hosting on Slack. We've got about 20 people there right now. Tasktogether.dev. Check us out. And thank you again, Juan, for this awesome discussion.
All right, cool. And we'll be here next time, next Thursday. All right, that's end it.